So in each industry, there are different kinds of lies and values like that drive how the entire industry works. Now, globally, you look at the pharmaceutical industry, or you look at the media, mass media, or you look at the education sector, and God has placed Christians in those sectors in each culture, but we seldom reflect on what values drive those sectors. And I believe Christians need to step back and reflect more with an understanding of kingdom values and being able to really reflect on how do the everyday opportunities engage and relate to kingdom values. But more than that, what can they do to change the narrative, to change the story, to change the values?
The future of a nation is shaped by its educators. I say this because those who educate the next generation, whether that's done in the school, the home, or the church, those educators are shaping worldviews. And worldviews shape nations. My name is Christian Overman, and my primary occupation over the past 35 years has been that of an educator. I was blessed to be the principal of a Christian school for 14 years. And in the year 2000, my wife Kathy and I started a training and consulting service called Worldview Matters. And since then, we've had the privilege of training educators across the United States, as well as in Asia and Africa, Europe, South and Central America. And what I'm going to share with you are some tools and strategies that we've developed. Now, in this first session, I'd like to just share some introductory thoughts on what it means to think biblically about the vocation of an educator. Now, Darrell Miller rightly says, if the church does not disciple the nation will disciple the church. That's really a sobering truth. And while this series is for followers of Christ in all nations, I'm speaking to you from the perspective of an American, because that's where I was born, that's where I grew up. And I must tell you, honestly, that I've lived long enough in this country to witness a church being discipled in large part by a nation. And American Christians of the 21st century, we're coming to the startling realization that the biblical foundations for law and for civil government and for family that once provided commonly accepted harbor lights for our society have been replaced. In the 20th century, there was this incessant move in America towards the secularization of society and the privatization of Christianity. And that move was enormously successful. And what many Americans don't stop long enough to think about is that this move was really expedited greatly through elementary and secondary schools. Now, exactly how does a nation disciple the church? Well, I think in large part, it's through the education of children, starting as young as 4 or 5 years of age, and then the process continues through high school. That's the bad news. But let me pose a more important question for our purposes here. How can the church go about discipling a nation? And that's really what we're interested in. Well, I believe educators play a critical role in this process, whether it's in the home, the school, or the church. And that's what we want to address here. Let me underscore again that education is not something that just takes place in school. Parents are educators in the home, by design or default. Pastors, youth leaders are educators in the church. And what we want to share with you here We don't want it to be narrowly confined to school teachers in formal settings. And we want to share things that will have practical applications for all educators, no matter where they educate. But before I get to the practicalities, I'd like to lay a little bit of backdrop. There was a prominent 19th century theologian by the name of A.A. Hodge who gave a stern warning about the development of American education in the late 1800s. He was referring to the development of state schooling. And he said, quote, "It is self-evident that on this scheme, if it is consistently and persistently carried out in all parts of the country, the United States system of national popular education will be the most efficient and widespread means for the propagation of atheism which the world has ever seen." End of quote. Now many people will resist those words. They'll balk at them. They'll insist that really state education is neutral when it comes to worldview matters. But this question of not mixing worldview with education really needs to be carefully re-examined. You see, the question is not whether a particular worldview will be allowed to mix with education, but which worldview will mix. You can't have education in a vacuum separate from some view of reality. And today, the predominant worldview in education is a secularized view of reality. It's no longer permitted to teach students that God has spoken to human beings through the Bible. This was once allowed here. In fact, it was once encouraged. And I'll go so far as to say it was once expected by many, including national educational leaders of the past like Noah Webster. And we'll say more about him in the next session. Now, it's no longer permitted in this country to teach students in state schools that the Bible provides a standard for moral order. Yet it is allowable to teach that morality is clarified by society itself or by individuals within society. But here's the big question. Is it not equally a worldview statement to say the Bible does not provide a standard for morality as to say that it does? Are not both statements worldview statements? If it's a worldview statement to say Jesus is Lord of all and by him all things exist and are held together, isn't it also a worldview statement to say, in so many words or lack thereof, Jesus is not Lord of all. He's totally irrelevant to our discussion, whether it's on biology or art or current issues. Are not both of those positions worldview positions? Are they not both worldview assertions? And I humbly submit that they are. And to teach students that Christ and the Bible are irrelevant can be done effectively without actually saying those words. A teacher doesn't have to stand in front of a class and tell them the Bible has nothing to do with our discussion. They'll get it. You don't have to say that to effectively communicate the message that the Bible just isn't relevant. It's never brought up. Now, if we think any system of education is worldview neutral, we really have to think again. And I think if we were indoctrinating children in Buddhism or Islam or Native American animism, many Christian parents would hit the ceiling. Maybe. But when it comes to the indoctrination of children through what John Dewey called a common faith, which he described as a non-theistic faith, many Christians are curiously passive. Dewey was the dominant voice in 20th century American education. He advocated what was called progressive education. He was an outspoken atheist. He was one of the signers of the Humanist Manifesto in 1933, and in his book, A Common Faith, he spells out his non-theistic worldview in detail. It's called religious humanism. And this non-theistic view of reality really provided a foundation for his philosophy of education. And that philosophy influenced a whole generation of American educators. Now, this makes it really challenging for Christian teachers in state schools. And if you are a teacher in a state school, my aim here is to provide you with some hope. It is possible and it's legal to do a lot more than you might think towards helping students to see academics in the context of a biblically shaped worldview. I'll talk about those ways to do it later. And if God has called you to serve in a state school, you're really being called to a challenging work. And I know it's challenging work because I've done a bit of it myself. But even if you teach in a Christian school, it's possible to disconnect the biblical worldview from your academic subjects. I can tell you this from my own experience through our organization, Worldview Matters. It happens a lot. It can happen as much in Christian schools as it does in state schools. Because Christian education is not Christian simply because the teacher knows the Lord or opens the class with prayer or adds a Bible verse or the kids go to chapel once a week. Now, these are all good things, essential things, but they do not Christian education make. Now, my biggest concern about children being taught through education that does not present academics in the context of a biblical frame of reference, my biggest concern is not that they will become atheists. My biggest concern is that they will become dualists. A dualist is one who reads the Bible, prays, go to church on Sunday, yet doesn't make any real connection between God's Word and what goes on in the workplace for 40, 60 hours a week because they think faith is a personal, private matter and the workplace is public, and therefore it's, quote, secular. Christian dualists, they don't view their work in the office or the shop in the context of a biblical worldview because as students, they never mixed it with math or science or sports. So why should they mix it now with building houses, selling vegetables, or practicing law or driving a bus? And many people, even in the church, call those endeavors secular jobs. But wait, where exactly is this so-called secular world? And as Darrow and Scott pointed out, the sacred-secular divide, it's a false view of reality. Even the word secular is a misnomer. There is no secular world. The earth and everything in it belongs to God. And as humans, we were specially created in His likeness for a purpose. And that purpose, as has been so well explained, is that we should govern well over His stuff. This is what God had in mind for humans in the beginning when He created us, when He said, let us make man in our image and likeness, and let them rule or govern over all my stuff, over all the earth. We were created to govern over the blue planet, and everything in it includes water, salty and fresh kind, and air and electricity, and sound waves and light and maple trees and money. It includes fish and birds and cows and carrots and fingers and thumbs and arms and feet, not to mention real estate, sweet potatoes, soybeans, digital images, smartphones, ships and airplanes, paper glue, ice cream, and cake. The purpose of education, then, is to equip the next generation to govern well over all of God's things, even in their broken condition. It's about bringing farming and business and law and economics and journalism into alignment with the King and his ways, so that God's will is done on earth as it is in heaven, as Jesus prayed. And for students, it's about bringing finger painting and essay writing into alignment with God's purposes, governing well over his colors, his gift of language. So education that's authentic, if I can use that word. I'm not keen on even using the word Christian education. Unfortunately, not all Christian education, I think, is authentic education. Education that's authentic is education that trains and equips that next generation to engage in that purpose of governance well. We're all called to be earth tenders. Earth tending is an immense job. It's a job as broad as creation is wide. It requires a variety of occupations, including carpentry, civil service, high-tech work, and homemaking. So, to conclude this first session for educators, I want to say it one more time. The role of the educator is to equip the next generation to govern well over the totality of God's creation, even in its broken condition. This is the great overarching purpose for human beings, and this is what provides an overarching purpose for education and a powerful incentive for learning.